School Book by John Milner, a teacher's memoir. That's me. Ramshackle Book, a memoir by John Milner. Now, when John Milner tells you that these books are memoirs, he's lying to you. These books were written back at a time when memoir was a big thing. It was in. And I think I called these books memoirs then because I thought it might increase sales. It didn't. But even then, I knew that I was not writing, strictly speaking, straight out memoirs. In fact, at the beginning, in the introduction of School Book, I wrote, I started this book more for myself than for others. It was to be an act of self-preservation, my remembrance of my teaching years. I had retired and was inclined to look back and sum up. As I wrote, though, something else took over. I think it was the school. I found myself wanting to tell others, teachers, retirees, anybody for whom school has been important and special, what the school I graduated from and then taught in meant to me. I wanted others to know. I wanted to confirm something I think we share. I did not start out to write a positive or upbeat book, but I think that's what it turned out to be. I make no apologies. We have plenty of recent criticisms of American public education on our shelves. Maybe it was time for this book. So that's the reason that this is not strictly a story of my teaching years in a chronological order or anything like it. It's not really a memoir. In fact, the chapters in this book are called Method, The White Palace, which was a name I had for the school that I taught in, the high school, that was sort of a mockery of it. School Reality 1, School Reality 2, School Reality 3, The Complete Sentence, Discipline, The Football Coach, The Personal Experience Job, Between the Floors, You Must Have Seen a Lot of Change, and Class of '53. That's the year I graduated from this school before I later, in 1959, came back to teach in it. Let me read you the beginning of the School Reality 1 chapter. The school was straight. It had no curves to it. It was all rectangles and right angles and rows, lockers and classrooms and desks, terrazzo tile squares lining the hall floors. Even the lights overhead looked like ice cube trays. And time was boxy. 50-minute classes, 5 minutes for passing, 25 minutes for lunch. English, math, science, history, study hall, gym, Monday through Friday, September through June. Everything was wired to and an extension of the center. The clocks all ticked together, click, all over the building. The bells all rang together. You could be outside and hear the final bell ringing inside. It was like a last judgment. The public address system echoed up and down the corridors and intruded into the classrooms, as did the in-school phone system. You'd be pulling together the key point of your day's lesson, just reaching the carefully prepared for grand climax, when ding-dong, they used a chime to alert you that an announcement was about to be pumped through. They'd want teachers to send their class load sheets to the front office, or buzz, buzz. The phone would go, and they'd want Johnny to report to the health office immediately. There was even a siren that sounded the alert in the old days when we were still doing air raid drills. It sounded as if it came from the very bowels of the building. It sounded like a wolf baying. We would leave the classroom and stand in the darkened hallways facing the lockers, and there would be silence except for the wailing of the siren. It was terrifying and was meant to be. It was the only time I knew students to stay silent for so long. By contrast, the fire alarm gong was a jolly sound that signaled time out, time for banter with friends while sauntering out of the building. The tentacles from the center were forever reaching out for you and taking hold. You couldn't escape, any more than you could escape from the right angles and the boxes. It was school reality. as was the forcing of the roundness of the students into the boxes. The students, of course, had all the curves, a round volatility. It's a wonder the place didn't blow sky high every day, trying to compress all that roundness into the right angles. So that's School Reality 1. Here's the beginning of School Reality 3. I'm going to skip School Reality 2 today. And then there were good times. There were times when the classroom was like a fireworks display. Rockets whizzing back and forth, students and teachers setting them off together, firing them off into crisscrossing explosions of understanding. Some people like to use flower imagery to say students bloom and blossom. To me, a classroom on a good day was fireworks. Though we called it discussion, it was like percussion. Even the kids who didn't talk were into it, into the rhythm. You could tell. It was dynamic and exciting, and what I now miss most about school. Here's the beginning of the chapter on discipline. A student once went from my classroom to the roof of the school above the auditorium, 3 stories up, and thought about jumping off. He climbed onto the roof through the window of a 4th-story study hall that was empty at the time. Looking down from the edge, he attracted attention. The police and fire department came. A reporter and camera crew from a local TV station showed up. A crowd gathered. I was later told at least one person called out to him to jump. People who might be of help were summoned and brought to the window to try to talk him back in. And part of the rest of that chapter on discipline goes on to tell about that kid and why he wanted to jump after leaving my classroom that day. It was something that shook me up as a young teacher. I conclude at the end of the chapter on discipline that discipline with a small d works better than discipline with a capital D. I have another chapter in this book called Between the Floors. Because it is a school of 4 floors, it has a passenger elevator with a full-time operator, or did the years I taught there. Since then, cost-cutting has done away with the operator, and teachers now run the elevator themselves. None of the other schools in the district had such a convenience, and it seemed a luxury, one of the perks of teaching at the high school. The elevator was a little Rialto, the place where paths crossed as we went about the day's business. The mood on the elevator was often an indicator of the state of the school on a particular day or at a particular hour. On glum Monday mornings, on the way up, people would be girding themselves for the day and the work to come. On such mornings, we looked like riders on the New York subway system, withdrawn inside ourselves. I thought of the elevator operator as like Charon ferrying the dead to Hades in the myth. And sometimes, on such mornings, the devil would get into me, and I would sing to my fellow passengers a verse from the morning anthem out of the Threepenny Opera by Brecht and Blitzstein and Weil. Wake up, all you godless, wake up. Come, open your sinful blue eyes. With greed runneth over your cup. So start the day's blessings and lies. I liked hissing the final S's. Though not everyone appreciated this morning greeting, it did liven things up on the elevator. Payday Friday afternoons, on the way down, I sometimes sang other lines from the Threepenny Opera. Happy ending, nice and tidy, it's a rule I learned in school. Get your money every Friday, happy endings are the rule. People seem to like that one better. Well, that gives you some idea of School Book, a teacher's memoir. There's a lot else in there, too. As far as Ramshackle Book, a memoir, goes, here's what I said toward the beginning of that book. This book is not a memoir by anyone who has done or thought or said great things. This book is not by anyone who has contributed in any significant way to the history or achievement or meaning of his times. This memoir is not even by anyone who has particularly scintillating stuff to remember. Do not look for X-rated tidbits here. Nor is this book, strictly speaking, always a memoir. It is a catch-all, a grab bag, a mongrelly, sometimes oxymoronic mixture of remembrance and commentary and opinion, essay and story and poem, hope and doubt, and maybe at times even despair. This is a ramshackle book by a ramshackle writer, a rank amateur, who nonetheless has the audacity to think he has something to say worth hearing. The ramshackle idea came from a little poem, a Japanese haiku, that I used to use in my English class. It's called New Year's Day. A new year starting, but it's just as it stands here, this ramshackle hut. And I always thought of myself as the ramshackle hut. Ramshackle meaning sort of run down and in need of repair. But I also thought of a lot of other things as ramshackle, including sometimes our school system, or the government, or the world going on around me. Here are some of the chapter headings for Ramshackle Book. Club Feet, On Becoming Mortal, Euclid Avenue, Delaware Road, Tex, Buffalo, College Cool, Daisy, Liberal, Conservative, and the Afterlife, Money, A Modest Proposal, Flossie, You Are Your Own Dog, Homeowning, Hudson Things, Bunny and Bly, those are my parents, The Media, Was I Doing Anything? Sports and Fate, Postmodern, Ramshackleness Revisited. Let me read you from the chapter called Delaware Road. For me, the center, the heart of this town, has always been one particular road, Delaware Road. Delaware Avenue, the town's main street, which the road departs from and then returns to, is straight and efficient and businesslike. It is where most of the shops and businesses are concentrated. Delaware Road, on the other hand, wanders off from the avenue at its own angle and curves along on what seems a more leisurely and independent course. It has schools and churches, the library, private homes, homes converted to doctors' offices, apartment buildings, one of them very genteel looking, another with a stucco front looking bare and a bit run down. There's a tiny cemetery behind an iron fence, inactive now, left over from the days when this was all farm country. There's a shopping plaza, and then as the road finds its way back to the avenue at the north end of the town, where the two big and still operational cemeteries await us, there are newer homes built next to some of the original farmhouses. Delaware Road is various and quirky, personal and ramshackle. You can imagine that if you go far enough back in time along this route, you will find the original trail here that ran through these parts before there was a town, before the straight avenue tried to take over from the meandering road. Sometimes I write about the people that I knew when I was growing up. Here's the beginning of a chapter called Tex. Whenever Tex Landenberger stayed for dinner at our house, and that seemed more and more often by the time I was 14 and 15. She'd help clean up afterwards. And one of the things she always did was put the dining room chairs back against the wall. We kept them up by the table. This interested me. I thought maybe it was one of the differences between North and South, between my family's New England background, with its uptight town ways, and her more open country Southern style. She came from East Texas, from Port Arthur on the Gulf, but I imagined something of inland Texas in her too, open plains and farmhouses, whose bare rooms had windows that looked out at flat fields going off as far as you could see. Though she'd been living in the North for several years, Tex still spoke with a yawl drawl, and there was something tough, almost manly, in the way she talked and laughed and enjoyed herself. She was small and trim, and she dressed well, but she had a big throaty voice and big wide-open eyes. She looked like Judy Garland, the older Garland, and she was a working lady too, even though she was married. She had no children and was the only woman friend my parents had in those days who worked. She was private secretary to the president of a big local company, an important man in the community. I remember my father and other men commenting on how bright and sharp Tex had to be to hold such a job. They admired her. She was one of the boys. I thought she was great too. She didn't talk down to me. She treated me as if I were one of the boys. That's Tex. Unfortunately, Tex went on to hard times, which I talk about also. Finally, let me read you a little bit about the city near where I have lived all my life, the city of Buffalo. Buffalo is a ramshackle city these days, Rust Belt ramshackle. It was once such a proud and prosperous and progressive city. It was a major Great Lakes port and a national railroad hub, second in activity only to Chicago. It was the funnel through which the grain and ore from the Midwest moved east, the center for flour milling and steel milling, automobile and airplane manufacture, and all the subsidiary industry that proliferates around such giants. Much of it, at one time, locally owned. It was a city of parks and tree-lined boulevards, with a renowned concert hall and first-rate orchestra, a city where people came from the outlying areas to shop in the downtown department stores. It was a city of ethnic neighborhoods, with their own food specialties and dialects and legends. The Irish First Ward in South Buffalo, the Italian West Side, the Polish and German East Side, Riverside and Black Rock, the waspy silk-stocking Delaware Park District. It was a city where blacks coming from the South found well-paying jobs and a respect and a place for their culture. It was a city of over 600,000 at its height at the time of the Second World War. Today, there are parts of Buffalo that look like what some German cities must have looked like after the war, bombed out and devastated. What hit Buffalo was the St. Lawrence Seaway, which enabled the ships to bypass the port at the end of the lake. And then there was the more general national shift that took place after the war, when so much industry went south for cheaper labor, newer plants, lower taxes. It all happened within about 20 years, and it left the grain elevators along the Buffalo River looking like frozen brooding giants, and the remnants of the Bethlehem Steel Complex just south of the city in Lackawanna looking like a dead dinosaur, its decaying carcass stretched out along the lakefront. You can't drive around Buffalo these days in the old industrial sections without coming upon these relics, great empty brick and steel hulks, windows boarded up, the outer walls grimy and graffiti-ridden, the roofs collapsing. They're eerily quiet reminders of the city's earlier roar and energy. For me, they have a certain beauty of their own, a patina of the past, a pride. They stand there just as they are and ask no quarter. Well, that'll give you some idea of what's in School Book and the kind of thing that's in Ramshackle Book, the kind of thing that I pretended to call memoir writing. You can find out how to buy these books by looking at the text that's connected with this video, and any sales are certainly appreciated. That's all for today.